Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar this morning. It's lovely to see you all. We've got school leaders and ITT mentors and people who support school improvement in local authorities across the country here this morning. So thank you so much for joining our webinar. We're delighted to be doing this in partnership with Prestolee, and our format today will be some introductions to the panel, followed by questions that have already been planned. And then there is an opportunity as well for you to ask some questions. If you have a technical question that you want to ask just about the webinar that's happening this morning, then please do that via the chat button. If you have a question that you'd like the panel to answer a bit later on during the webinar, then please do that using the Q&A chat. Lovely. My name's Helen Woodward. Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen, was it? Let me just close that. There we go. My name's Helen Woodward and I'm chairing today. So welcome to our webinar. Lovely to see you all. So our panel today, we have Professor Sam Twiselton. Welcome, Sam. Sam is the Director of the Sheffield Institute of Education at Sheffield Hallam University and National Centre for Education, Research and Practice. And they're also a provider of the new Early Career Framework. And we're looking forward to Sam telling us about that today. Mike Tonge is the CEO for Prestolee Multi-Academy Trust in Barton. Prestolee has a teaching school and a skit within the trust and 5 primary schools, and Mike also has an additional role supporting the Teaching School Council and Greater Manchester Learning Partnership. And Victoria Unsworth, who is head teacher at Barton Moss Primary School in Trafford, which is also part of Prestolee Multi-Academy Trust. So thanks so much to all our panel for joining us today. Our panellists have extensive experience in leading initial teacher training and recruiting teachers and NQT support and development. So I'm going to start our questions today. And my first question is to you, Mike. Oh, sorry, this is what we'll be discussing today, which you already know about because you came on the webinar. So my first question for Mike today is about the quality and experience of initial teacher training last year, before and during, while schools were in lockdown. So Mike, we'd be really interested to hear about that because I know that is something that head teachers have expressed concern about.
Yeah, I think if I can just start by contextualising that question. The first thing to remember is that actually these are trainees at degree level. So we've already got people who are reasonably clever and reasonably reflective and have already succeeded in some level academically. So they're going to pick stuff up. Obviously, they'd already had, before they arrive, as most providers will give you, is pre-course support, face-to-face lectures, and they had had a significant amount of time already in September, October, November, December, January, February, and most of March with the traditional training route. So they already had quite a lot of experience upon which to draw. What you're looking for in that third teaching practice, which is where the reflective practice comes in, is to build on their experience. So there was already a context under which you can build experience and expertise. There was already a range of school experiences that they'd had. Most of these trainees have been in Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, had contrasting placements, had their focused SEM placements, had their focused work on behaviour done. It was that shift then immediately after that from practical reflection, a kind of process of research, practical implications, delivery, and then reflection, missing one of those steps, which was the actual practice in a school. However, the other steps around understanding context, understanding schools, and becoming a reflective practitioner was actually really important. Now, you cannot compensate for the loss of that third major teaching practice. What you can do is mitigate all of that experience, because actually at the very heart of teaching, this is an intellectually driven profession. It's not about physically standing in front of children every day of the week. It's about, particularly when you're starting on that journey as a professional, is that notion of being a reflective practitioner, able to draw on understanding and research to deliver quality lessons. Now, whilst there's an element of that that's been missing, you need to think of this as a 2-year process where the practice hits over time. You should also think very much around the balance of practice against the balance of activity. And whilst there was a gap in terms of the practical applications, one of the things we were able to do with the mitigation with the course is we were able to look at much more research around practice, much more curriculum specific knowledge, much more understanding about delivery models, and particularly those areas around assessment and assessing pupils. There was lots of live lessons that we could observe and work through, because there was lots going on with Google Classrooms. There was lots of actual physical teaching you could observe. They could practice delivery with wider audiences. So that notion of what makes a good teacher is about being a reflective practitioner. And that was built in all the way through, particularly that third aspect of that term. I think the other thing to remember is that as a profession, we do have a moral imperative to make sure that these trainees succeed. And that's not about thinking about those missed few weeks over the summer term. That's thinking about how we can actually build on their intelligence-driven practice by the time they arrive in schools in September, because they have had basically 3 levels of experience. Yes, they've had their early training. Yes, they've had their early practice, but they've had an awful lot of ability to reflect on those experiences, and through reflection and learning and actually developing curriculum knowledge, they may become long-term better teachers because of it, because they've had a different kind of experience. And I think when we reflect on ITE, we might actually reflect on whether or not the level of practical application is necessarily the right balance, because we might learn things around this being a 2 to 3 year process rather than a one-size-fits-all straight in, it's a 1 year, off you go approach. And I think what we'll see is things like the early career framework, which I know Sam will talk about a little bit later, and that NQT induction process becomes even more important. But sitting underneath all of that is the quality of mentoring. And one of the things we were able to do, because we were developing the course, is to develop better quality mentors who were able to help trainees be better at reflective practice. So there's an awful lot of work done, particularly in terms of their understanding, their approach, and their reflective practice. Is that my 5 minutes, Helen?
It is your 5 minutes. Thank you very much. You did very well with that.
You all right?
That's very helpful. Thank you, Mike. And there are questions for people to follow up, opportunities for people to follow up with questions, which I'm sure they will do. But for now, I'm going to move us on, and we're going to talk to Victoria. Victoria, welcome. And you've recruited an NQT this year, which has been, so you've recruited somebody who's had that kind of challenging experience of having their teacher training through school lockdowns, and then has come in during what has undoubtedly been probably one of the most challenging terms we've ever seen. So we're really interested to hear from you. What have been the benefits of having an NQT and planning their support, and how you've done that?
Okay, thank you, Helen. So obviously the benefits of having an NQT at our school has been they've added value to our school. They've added value to our teaching team. They've added a lot of value in terms of teamwork, in terms of being a reflective practitioner. They've also added lots of value in terms of new ideas that they've brought to school, new commitment. And as Mike said, the training was different, but it wasn't necessarily weaker training. It was still that practical-led program, that practical advice, that hands-on, even through that online training. The NQT was ready to hit the ground running. We did share the skip training course. They did share with us their career entry development profile, so we were able to identify the strengths of the NQT, able to identify very early on when we appointed him what areas he wanted to focus on. And in terms of planning their support, we've planned our professional development meetings around the support that NQT needed, because it's the leader's responsibility in our school to provide the circumstances in which all staff can succeed. So actually, having an NQT, having teachers that need that support, it's a collaborative approach. We all support the NQT here at Barton Moss. So it really, really did help us having those areas of focus to plan our staff meetings, to plan our CPD. And yes, CPD at the minute isn't the same. You know, it's not the same. However, the online courses, the meetings that we're having, even if it is social distancing, the conversations around assessment, the conversations around planning, around questioning, and around planning that support for the NQT, having, you know, 30 children in a class with range of abilities, and even that planning that support with the Senko. So it's really, really been beneficial for us to have an NQT here at Barton Moss, because it's added real value to our team, and the support. You know, we have still been able to do team teaching because I have assigned myself to that bubble. Yes, he can go and observe every class at different schools. However, still, like Mike said, videoing lessons, having a discussion. We've had opportunities to video teachers in this school so that we can use that as sharing good practice. So it's really, really been beneficial for us to have that NQT, and the support, like Mike said, we're only in term 1. But the commitment's there, the resilience is there, the determination to succeed for those children is there. So all that hasn't changed. It's just been a little bit different.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. I've got a bit of a follow-up question for you, actually, because I know that you're a very experienced head teacher, so you've had several NQTs work with you over the years so far. Was there a noticeable difference? Was there a difference with this NQT that you feel could be attributed to the lockdown term? And if yes, what was that difference?
I actually didn't feel that there was a difference in terms of the determination, the resilience to succeed, the wanting to achieve. The interview process was obviously very different. The interview process was different in terms of it was online, it was via Zoom, but some of the activities that we gave them on the interview process were some of the activities that I would actually, even post-COVID, I would actually still use. So because the interview process and the induction was still as successful, I do feel that the NQT had hit the ground running, raring to go, and actually is doing a really, really good job. Really good job.
Good. That's great to hear. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on. And Sam, we're going to ask you. Quite a few people have asked, actually, I don't really understand what's coming. What is the early career framework? Why is it here? And what's it going to mean for schools? So we'd be really interested to hear your comments about that.
So I don't blame people for being a little bit confused, because it's coming in as a national thing for absolutely everybody from next September, but it is currently being piloted in some parts of the country, including Greater Manchester, where many of you are right now. But if I just focus on what's coming for everybody next year is probably the most straightforward way to do it. So from next year, it comes in as an entitlement for all NQTs that they will have access to this thing called the Early Career Framework. It's a support and development programme that will run for 2 years. So what that's doing is actually guaranteeing for everybody from next year a minimum of 3 years, assuming that they might have trained on a 1-year course. It's obviously longer than that if they were on a longer initial teacher training programme. But for everybody, it's at least 3 years, because importantly, you need to see the two things joined together, just as Mike was saying earlier. So ITT and early career support and development are seen as a kind of seamless progression in the early career phase. And that brings our system much closer to high performing systems elsewhere in the world, because we all know that you can't really train to teach in a year. It's a ridiculous kind of assumption that you can. We all know that it's impossible as somebody who's done a 1-year training course to be the fully formed product. In fact, you never are really, we're all still learning. But I think particularly in those early years, you absolutely are still learning, and it's really important that you get that systematic, ongoing, high quality support and development. And the early career framework will guarantee that for everybody. It's going to be available in a range of forms. So in the pilots that are happening this year, there are 4 different providers, or when I say provider, it's actually usually several people involved in one provider. So we're involved in a pilot with an Education Development Trust. But there's also one that's being run by Teach First, one that's being run by Ambition, and one that's being run by UCL in partnership with a few other universities. Those pilots all contain the same kind of thing, which will still be there in the national rollout from September. So it includes some online training, it includes some face-to-face training, it includes some self-study. Really importantly, it involves a lot of time with mentors. The mentors get really high quality training themselves, and then they provide really high quality in-school support and development for the NQTs that they're responsible for. And we know that's one of the most important features. That can be the real make or break of good ITT and good early career support. So for everybody, this will be available. At the moment, the government is in the process of deciding which organisations will be successful in terms of bids that have been submitted but have not yet been allocated. In putting their bids in, people had to adhere to one of the 4 pilot models. They're all fairly similar, but it's probably worth having a look at the materials that were published in the summer, just in terms of seeing the ways in which they're the same and the ways in which they're different. So from September, if you're employing an NQT, your NQT has to have access to the early career framework. It is an entitlement. However, you do have a choice. You have a choice of whoever is successful in securing those bids, and there will be several. But you could also, if you chose to, actually develop your own version, and there will be, I imagine, some multi-academy trusts and maybe some teaching school alliances who will do this. It might be that you've already got a really good NQT programme and you don't want to stop delivering that. In that case, you need to look at the materials, you need to look at the framework and just make sure that you've adapted your programme to be sure that you're covering what's there. It shouldn't be too hard because it's sort of fairly obvious, straightforward stuff that you would expect to see in that early career phase. It's just laid out in a systematic way so that you can be sure for all NQTs they're covering the same ground and they're getting the same thing. And it obviously extends into a second year as well, so it's there for RQTs as well as NQTs. It does involve as a really central spine that mentor support, I would recommend, I think if I was a head teacher, at least for next year, I would probably use one of the national programs, because that way you can be sure that your mentors are getting that mentor training. You're getting it from a nationally secured provider, and then possibly from the year after, I might be thinking about whether I want to carry on with the national program or whether I want to do my own. But there is that choice there. You don't have to just send them on one of the national programs. You could do it yourself, but you have to make sure that you're covering the framework. There's lots of materials that have been published to help you to do that. It's a fantastic thing. And I think just building a little bit on something that Mike said earlier, as well as being a great thing in its own right in terms of that high quality support and development, something I've noticed already starting to happen is it started a national conversation, a really healthy national conversation about the importance of supporting our early career teachers. I think we got to a place previously, and this didn't happen everywhere, but it certainly happened in enough places for it to cause me kind of concern. We got to a place where we did expect our NQTs to be able to hit the ground running in a way that was unrealistic. Lots of good reasons why you might find yourself doing that. If you're a head teacher, you feel like you've got a lot of accountability on you, you're being measured constantly, you're worried about Ofsted. But actually, what we saw began to happen as a result of that is more and more early career teachers leaving the profession because of the stress and the workload that unrealistic expectation brought on them. This national conversation has now made it really clear we shouldn't be expecting that of our NQTs. We do need to support them, we do need to develop them. And the early career framework is, for me, an illustration of a bigger picture about the importance of that early career phase and really making sure that we're looking after our teachers during it.
Lovely, thank you very much, Sam. That's really helpful to hear. I'm sure people will have questions. So I'm just going to remind people, in fact, I'm also going to just introduce Anjali. Anjali, just want to wave for us so we can see.
Hey there. I was just mentioning in chat that you can submit your questions and you'll pick them up as the session goes.
That's lovely, thank you. So you've done just exactly what I was going to say, which is do submit your questions. Anjali, who's our head of marketing, will be picking those up and pushing them our way for you. So thank you, thank you. We had some of you submitted questions already. And they fell largely into two groups, actually. We had, interesting that you picked up on mentors, Sam, there in particular, because we had quite a few questions about mentors. So we've tried to group the questions about mentors. Oh, there we go. And I'm going to put these over to Victoria and Mike in the first instance. So what is the role of the mentor? How are they trained? I think I'm going to take this one to you, Sam, on how they're trained, because we're talking about the new early career framework at the moment. And how can we best support NQTs and their mentors? And I'm going to give that one back to Mike and Victoria. So what is the role of an NQT mentor? Victoria, can I give that to you in the first instance?
Of course you can. So the role of the NQT mentor is to support the NQT, to guide the NQT, and as Sam said earlier, it's not to get everything right from day one. It's a long process to build these teachers. You cannot be, fully qualified teachers in that time. So the NQT mentor is to support them, to guide them, to use the training with the early careers framework as well as CPD, to develop the whole, all of them as a teacher, when it comes to marking and feedback, when it comes to parent relationships, when it comes to staff relationships. It really is to guide and support and be there for them, and identify the strengths, celebrate the strengths, support the areas of focus, and work together on them. As I said earlier, it's all our responsibility to support NQTs. It's all our responsibility to support each other. So in terms of the NQT mentor, it was really useful that we received the careers, the development profile for our NQT, so we could use that as a guide to move forward. My NQT actually has got two mentors, just because we feel that we can offer two different things, we can offer further things. So it really is a joint collaborative approach.
Let me just ask, Victoria, I mean, really honestly, practically, how much time does it take for the mentor to do that, to do it well?
Oh, that's a tricky question, Helen.
Oh,
it's a daily, sometimes daily support. Sometimes it's, when they're planning, whether that's in their PPA time. I often, in NQT time or PPA time, sit with them, support them, guide them, rearrange, meetings so that we can be there for them. Because the support is everything. And like you say, we don't want those, we don't want people to give up teaching when it's the best job in the world. Why would we want that? We wouldn't. So it's to support them and guide them in every aspect. Okay,
thank you. Thanks, Victoria. Mike, do you want to jump in on anything about the role of an NQT mentor?
Just a couple of things. The first thing I would say is that to follow up on the question about how much time it takes and the skill set, I'd say that there's one of my favourite sayings is that there's nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals. And so it's really important that actually you recognise that NQTs are very different. So simply having a set series of times, meetings and so on isn't always the most effective way. I think the couple of things I would sort of add is that, first of all, there's a reason that NQTs are the lowest paid members of staff, because actually they're starting their career development. So we should expect them to operate on a level commensurate with their skill set, and Ofsted would expect them to operate at a level commensurate with their skill set. So it's for schools to recognise that and build that up. I'd say the other things that the role of an NQT mentor is about the same thing I'd expect from an NQT. I want them to be emotionally intelligent. I want them to be reflective. I want them to care about what they're doing. And I'd want it to be someone who takes it seriously as a role, because actually as I said at the start, there is a moral imperative to make these people succeed. We can't sit here complaining about teacher crisis or the difficulties of getting people into teaching. And when we've got somebody who's keen and able sitting there, not develop them and not grow them. So I think those kind of aspects of it are the only things I would add. I thought Victoria gave a very full answer.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Sam, I'm going to give you this one on how mentors are trained, and we're focusing really on the new early career framework, how mentors will be trained. So we're not looking back, we're looking forward. You're on mute, Sam.
Used that space bar and it didn't work. Yeah, so building on what I said earlier, from next year, I'm really pleased. I mean, the NQT mentor role has been there forever. You know, it's a really important role. What happens from next year is it gets properly recognised in terms of really high quality training that will be available and funded, both in terms of the training itself being funded and the time to go on the training, which is a massive step forward. And therefore, hopefully the people who are going to be mentors to NQTs will feel like it's a great role that's getting proper recognition, because it needs to, because it's so important. Now, the best schools recognise actually having mentors who are properly trained is a really important part of school improvement, because actually being a mentor is really good for your own practice, as well as helping to support the practice of the NQT that you're supporting, because it makes you think, makes you deconstruct, it makes you think, you know, why did that work for me, and so on. Also, something that really good mentors will do is think about other expertise that the NQT might benefit from. So whether that's in somewhere else in the school, or if you're lucky enough to be working in a group of schools, it might be in a different school altogether. So, you know, if there's a child with special needs in the NQT's class, it may be the Senko, or it might be the school down the road that's a special school. So I think there's something about a good mentor being a facilitator of access to broader forms of support and expertise. I love that you've given yours to mentors. I think that's brilliant, because one of the things that can be problematic if you're the only mentor and you see yourself as the only person who's there to support the NQT is that you're having to wear two hats, because you are going to get involved in the assessment of the NQT as well as the support, and sometimes actually what an NQT needs is a shoulder to cry on, or just somebody to go and kind of unload onto. So I think making sure that you've got those kind of people available to your NQT is also really important. The best schools kind of wrap themselves around their NQTs in a range of different ways. And in doing that, actually makes a really good school environment for everybody. It kind of creates the right kind of culture of learning and support. And as I said, actual school improvement as well. The best schools have everybody trained as a mentor. And those mentors will probably be supporting both early career teachers and trainee teachers, and that creates a really kind of worthwhile, satisfying job for them. Good news is coming as well in terms of national qualifications for mentors. So from next year there will be a specialist MPQ called Leading Teacher Development. You don't have to have it to be a mentor, and not all mentors will have it, but if you're a kind of super mentor, which is something that does happen in some schools where you've got one uber mentor who is kind of coordinating across the school with lots of other mentors helping, then that might well be a qualification that will be really useful for you. But also, again, as I started, a really helpful illustration of sort of the importance of recognising that role and giving it the kind of status that it should have.
Yeah, thank you. Victoria, did you want to jump in there?
Yes, I just wanted to add something really. One of the benefits, I think, from having Prestolee skit training our teachers and our mentors for the students, we were able to transfer those skills as NQT mentors over to when they were in NQT. So when I talk about the transition between a student and an NQT, that is so important for head teachers, so that when you are interviewing and you found the right candidate, that communication between the school, the head teacher, the mentors and the provider is so important in order for that NQT to be successful. We as Sam said, we train all our teachers to be mentors. We do wrap everybody around the NQT to support, but we do that with all our teachers. So no, I just wanted to add that transition between, for us, obviously it was Prestolee skit, and obviously coming for that NQT coming into our school as an NQT, but that transition was really, really important for us.
Thank you. Before we just jump into that last question on the screen here, we've got a question come in. So somebody's saying, in fact, this is somebody who works in a skit. This is Victoria Gould saying, I'm absolutely thrilled that mentors are being given more status and credit. How do we make sure we get the right person in this role, a person who has the right personal qualities, character traits, as well as the expert knowledge? Give you a minute, and then Sam, do you want to make a comment about that for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear what Mike and Victoria have got to say about this, because it would be their decision, not mine. You know, following on from what's been said already, it shouldn't just be given to somebody who might have the time to do it. It needs careful thought in terms of emotional intelligence. I said previously, a certain amount of experience. I think if you've got the whole school involved, it is okay to have somebody being a mentor who has only, you know, might not be that long since they were an NQT themselves, as long as there are other people who've got more experience available to them as well. I think there, you know, there are advantages to having somebody who's close enough to it to remember what it was like to feel like, particularly in your sort of first term as an NQT. So I have seen really successful mentoring done by people who might be, you know, RQTs or still earlier in their career. The only ride I would say to that is just make sure there are people with more experience available as well, because it is quite an expert thing. You know, it's not just about being a shoulder to cry on. It is actually about developing somebody's practice. And across, particularly with the early career framework, you know, a whole range of different areas of knowledge. So having that expertise and that experience available is important as well. But I absolutely agree that emotional intelligence, that ability to empathize, that ability to sort of walk in those shoes, I think is really, really important.
Okay, Mike, anything to add before I move us on?
Yeah, I would just say that what we're looking for in terms of selecting someone who can do that is, first of all, as Sam said, recognizing that this is a village, not a single person, that we're, you know, we are raising somebody in our community of practice, as opposed to it being a single point of contact and it's just all on their shoulders. I think the most important thing is that you are able to be emotionally resilient, emotionally supportive, and hard-edged at times, but doing it in a way that leaves the person confident going forward without being crushed, because actually they still need to get up tomorrow, come in and do a job of work and stay with us for 30, 40 years in this role. I think the kind of person that we're looking at now is very different to the kind of person we looked at 3 or 4 years ago, because actually I think 3 or 4 years ago it was a low status, low expectation role, because it was just about, in lots of schools, giving out the paperwork or turning. But I think the early career framework has really raised the importance of having a mentor, and I like it to be someone who is reflective as a practitioner in their own work. Principally because actually what I want from my lead mentor is an ability not to lead mentors and ITE trainees, but actually to be a supportive face for all teachers, to be someone who is able to work reflectively with practice across the piece. So it's actually becoming a more important role in terms of the school community rather than just with those ITE trainees. But culture is very important. Getting the right person. I mean, I remember doing it, and I think I got the person that was 3 years away from retirement because he didn't do anything else when I first started, although that was a little while ago. So that shift has been really key.
Right, thank you, Mike. We've got a last question about how we can best support NQTs and their mentors. I think we've had a lot about supporting NQTs. We've heard about the training, the new training that's coming on. Thank you, Sam. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, anybody, about how mentors can be supported? You have talked about the kind of wraparound school approach. Any other support that mentors need that we could be thinking about?
In terms of how you support mentors, the first one is to recognise that actually they need time to do their job properly. And the second one, which I think is a big shift over the last couple of years, is that they need training, that they need support themselves, that they need actual time, not to be practically sitting in front of their ITE trainees, but to actually learning some of that process as well, and maybe in their own community of practice. That is a big shift, and I think that would enormously help that early career development.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to move us on. So we've got a group of questions that came up about the actual early career framework, including how you select which provider to work with, how it will be funded, and how NQT assessment takes place. And we've got another question that's come in from, we've got a few questions actually about this. What impact will this have on the number of lessons NQTs can teach and for how many years? Again, how much time for the mentor? And I think we've said quite a lot and it needs to be funded. I don't think we've pinned that down in hours. I'd be interested to know if before the end anybody will pitch in and say exactly how many hours they think that takes. What's the cost of schools to the programme? So we've got a number of questions coming in, but let's start with what we've got here. Sam, I'm going to ask you, how should somebody select which provider to work with?
I mean, it's not really a question that can be answered at the moment, because at the moment we don't know who the national providers for next year will be, because that procurement is still happening. So the bids are being submitted, but they haven't been assessed and announced yet. I think that'll happen in the new year. In putting in bids, bidders had to adopt one of the 4 models that's being piloted this year. And as I said, they're all fairly similar, but with some differences, and the materials for each of those 4 providers. So as I said, it's the Education Development Trust who we work in partnership. It's Teach First, it's Ambition Institute, and it's UCL IOE. Those were published in the summer, and I think having a look at their materials will give you an idea of the different 4 models. As I say, they're all pretty similar really, but there are some differences, and so whoever is successful will have had to have adopted one of those 4 models. So that gives you some things to be thinking about before the actual successful bidders are announced. I know Education Development Trust are bidding with us. So if we're successful, you know, our materials are there available. I don't know if the other 3 are. I assume they probably are, but I don't absolutely know that. So you know, you can be doing some homework, but until in the new year it's announced who's been successful, there's a limit to what you can get there. In terms of the funding, that the successful providers will then be making their programs available, and that's fully funded. So as a head teacher, you don't need to pay for it. And as I said, I think it was in the spending review announcement, one of the good things I was looking out for, because I knew that they'd been pushing very hard on this, but didn't know if they'd been successful. That does include funding for the mentor training, both in terms of it, you don't have to pay for it, and I think you get release time to go on it. I don't know if you get funding to do the mentor role. I suspect not, because as I said, that already existed as something that schools had to do. I do know there is additional funding, as well as, again, already existed. There was release time for NQTs in their first year of being an NQT. So I think, Michael, tell me if I'm right, in Victoria, is it 0.5, 0.0, oh, what am I talking about? Half a day a week. I think that's been extended. Well, I do know that's been extended into the second year. But again, I don't know about funding for time for mentors. I suspect that's not. In terms of the NQT assessment, every NQT will have an appropriate body that the school is using, and that's how it currently works. That work with the mentor. So there was a question earlier about do mentors assess NQTs? Well, formally it is appropriate body, but the appropriate body will normally talk to the mentor. So the mentor will have quite a role in terms of determining those judgments. At the moment, it takes place over, you know, I think it's three formal points over the NQT year. There's not going to be any more through the early career framework. It's just spread out over 2 years. So the bar isn't any higher. You're still meeting the same set of standards that people have always had to meet. It's just that you've got longer to sort of develop the expertise and the skill to sort of show that by the end of the RQT year, you've got there. There won't be any more assessments. They'll just be more spread out with bigger gaps in between them, is my understanding of how it's going to work.
Thank you, Sam. We've got a follow-up question there from Peter Moore, who's asking, is the mentor also the assessor of the NQT?
Yeah, so I saw that question. That's what I was just talking about just now. I mean, Vicky, you might want to tell me a bit more about how it works for you with your NQTs. But my understanding is that formally it's the appropriate body who signs off at the end of the induction period whether somebody has met the standards as an early career teacher. But they will usually do that in conjunction with the mentor. But I'll let Victoria and Mike say a bit more about that.
Mike, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I would say in terms of the appropriate body at times can be quite distant from the actual NQT on the ground. So you are reliant on the quality of the mentor and the quality of the school's own assessments within that. I think where there's been friction between appropriate bodies and schools in the past is where perhaps schools have had a too high expectation of where those NQTs should be early on. And it's when you get to a point where you're saying, actually, I think my NQT may be struggling, that you'll see more impact from the appropriate body, which could be the local authority, it could be a teaching school, it could be anyone that's got that designation. But it is really important that mentor training assesses where the trainee should be rather than where they want the trainee to be, and the expectations, and particularly the race for excellence over time. And that's where the appropriate body setting out its expectations through its paperwork and through its processes is really important. So choosing an appropriate body is also important, because as with all things, you have a choice. And if you're not happy with the process of the appropriate body, you should talk to another one.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, I'm just going to pick up on some really practical questions that are coming through. So we've got a question from a head teacher who's saying, in a secondary school, what TLR would be appropriate for a mentor? Going to give you a pause on that one.
I saw that one coming in and I thought, oh, I hope Mike will answer that. shall I kick off with my view? And I'll let Mike sort of say a more sensible answer than me, because I think I don't think there's one right answer to that question, because it depends how mentoring is organised in the school. I think if you're in the kind of role I described earlier, that might be the sort of person who might take the specialist MPQ, then that might have a TLR attached to it, because you're probably overseeing not only your own mentoring of your own NQTs and trainees and whoever, but others as well, in which case it does have a sort of middle leadership kind of feel about it. If you're just purely responsible for your own NQT, and as I said, for some people that might be fairly early on in somebody's career, then I don't think it's automatic that you'd get a TLR for that. But I'll let Mike and Victoria tell me I'm wrong on that one.
No, that's a good answer, Sam. I would say that there should be no automatic expectation of getting a TLR if you're doing some mentoring. I think it depends on a number of factors. The first one is whether or not that is about one NQT or 10 NQTs. If you've got a large commitment in terms of assessment and activity and line management, then that should have some level of financial recompense or release time. There are lots of different ways of rewarding someone for that. I think the second thing is it depends on the defined role, because lots of the mentor roles are a hybrid role around improving the quality of teaching and learning, of which part of that is an element of NQT support. An element of that is about mentoring. I think actually in terms of professional development and qualification, if people choose to develop their skill set and their careers, I know it's not a politically correct answer, but actually that's just good career development. And I would hope that professional teachers would want to do that. And there wouldn't necessarily be a TLR associated with it in the same way as if you got the SENCO qualification, there'd be an expectation around a TLR sitting with that. And it's for individual schools to do that. So there are lots of factors. So actually, I don't think any of us could actually answer that question. It depends very much on your individual circumstances and the individual expectations of that role.
Okay, thank you. And another one, we've got just a very practical question again, because we talked about how much release time NQTs get. So if an NQT teaches 40 periods in the first year, is this expected to continue? Normally it would be 40 in the first year and 43 after that. Have we got that level of detail? Not sure by the looks of things.
I'm not sure if I totally understood the question, but as I've said already, there is funding should be going into schools' budgets to release RQT, so somebody in second year of their career, as the early career framework works its way through. So that won't be next year, but the year after. Okay. And I think it's the same level as they are as NQT, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
As I understand it, it's the same level. So where you get your 20% release time in that first year as an NQT, because you get your PPA plus the additional NQT time, you get the same level in your second year. That's as I understand it, but I'm not making government policy. I'm not sure anyone's making government policy at the moment, but you know, I'm definitely not doing that.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you. And we've got a question. This is, I mean, they're all interesting questions, but this is a question about the new teaching school hubs and how the new teaching school, I'm just looking for it on my list, bear with me while I scan because I've definitely seen it. But we've got a question about how this will impact on teaching school hubs, or how teaching school hubs will impact and interweave with the early career framework. I think, Mike, I'm going to give that one to you again, because I know because of your teaching school council work, you've had some involvement with the development of it.
There's a great tension between currently the role of teaching school hubs and the role of the accredited provider of the early career framework, because actually teaching school hubs like the NPQs and so on will have the responsibility for quality assurance. They'll also have the responsibility for coordinating across whatever region they are allocated. And so the role of the teaching school hub is more around facilitation as opposed to being the direct provider, as I understand it. So actually the providers sit with, whether it's Ambition or whether it's the Institute of Education, if it's UCL, you know, whoever that is, are the designated provider. The role of teaching school hubs is to make sure that the IT experience in their focused area is effectively coordinated, supported, delivered, ensured that actually there's some quality assurance around that, and an information sharing platform to make sure that actually the system works. But they don't have the direct responsibility as a provider, because that's been allocated to the individual contract holders, whoever they are. So it's about being glue in the system as opposed to being a delivery arm. Okay,
that's helpful.
Can I just chip in on that? 'Cause I think in some cases they may become a delivery arm as well. So I think everything that Mike said is absolutely right. And there's a slight sort of timing issue with this, because I know from Education Development Trust's bid, what's going into that bid is the idea of delivery hubs, you know, in different regions, and where there already is a teaching school hub as part of the test and learn. In some cases, I know that, you know, we've got some of those involved in the bid, and in the future we would expect to have some of the not yet to be designated teaching school hubs as a delivery arm for a particular region. But you don't have to be a teaching school hub to be a hub for the early career framework and indeed for the NPQs. So it is a little bit confusing, but certainly from our bid's point of view, we do see them as really important parts of the delivery and actually indeed the development. So we have got some hubs who, if we're successful, will help us develop the model and then deliver it for their region.
Okay, no, that's helpful. So I suppose what that makes me want to ask then is, for those of us that are still committed to social constructivism and collaborative learning and co-creation and network development, and understanding and believing that we learn together about how best to do these things by listening to all the stakeholders. Where, and I'm going to put this one to Sam, where do you think can be the best, and kind of looking at an appreciative inquiry approach, really, where will be the best place to really start developing our learning of how effectively are we implementing the new early career framework? And as a community of education practitioners, how can we continue to develop our learning and continue to improve the experience for NQTs, mentors, and impact positively on school improvement and outcomes for children and young people? Because that's where we're aiming here. If we don't do that, we kind of haven't done it, really. So where are we going to find those communities of practice that we can join, where we're going to find that kind of commitment to that collaborative learning?
Really good question, really hard question, as always from you, Helen. I mean, I think, you know, there's a sort of national policy answer to that, which is, you know, one of the reasons why they set up the pilots was so they could learn from them in terms of then rolling it out nationally and implementing it nationally. But I think, you know, much deeper, better answer to your question is that those local hubs that I just described need to be set up in that way. So I know that they are, you know, in terms of the bid that we're involved in, but I'm pretty sure it'll be the same for all of them, being set up already in a way that multiple sort of stakeholders will get involved in the development of the model in the first place. And then those multiple stakeholders will be helping us to evaluate and improve it as we go. And that will include, you know, the voices of the NQTs and their mentors, as well as all those who are sort of formally contracted to develop the programme. I mean, it's something that's obviously not even started in terms of a national provision yet. So it's going to be in its infancy for quite a long time. So I would hope it will evolve and improve over the years as we learn what works and what doesn't work. And I think there'll be some interesting learning from this pilot year that we wouldn't have anticipated pre-pandemic in terms of what you can do virtually.
Yeah.
You know, originally when we were putting in the bid for the original pilot, it was all kind of face to face, and obviously most of it hasn't been. But seems to have worked quite well. And if we can carry on with that virtual things, it opens up actually the possibility, for example, more subject specific elements for secondary, more context specific for certain kind of regions and so on, because you can get economies of scale because you can connect people up virtually. So you might have people from Cornwall working with people from Cumbria on a sort of rural schools version of some elements of it, for example. So I'm quite excited about the possibilities. But I think you're absolutely right. You need to be going into it with that appreciative inquiry, sort of social constructivist kind of framework. And there's absolutely nothing about how it's all been set up through the sort of policy and the procurement that prevents you from doing that. So it's up to all the providers to make sure that that's how they go about it, I guess.
That's helpful. Thank you, Sam. Michael, Victoria, did you want to jump in there?
I just wanted to add, really, it is worth for head teachers to have a look at what's out there at the minute before next September. We do use some of the materials from the early careers framework, some of the subject training, really specific for our NQT, and they are really worthwhile and really supportive of that development of the NQT. But if you didn't mind, Helen, I just wanted to add something from one of the questions earlier on, if possible. One of the questions was about do the NQT mentors do the NQT assessment? Now for us here, that was one of the areas where my NQT mentor, one of my NQT mentors, was a bit lacked a little bit of confidence with this year. So we're actually doing that side of things for the NQT assessment side of things together for term 1 and term 2, so that the NQT mentor feels just as just as confident, if you like, to lead that forward into the second year. So it is about developing NQTs, but actually giving the NQT mentors that skill set and that confidence to move forward with it independently as well.
Okay, thank you, Victoria, that's helpful. Okay, we're doing well, we're coming towards the end. One of the questions that we had submitted was about the COVID catch-up curriculum, which surprised us, but as it was asked, we thought we'd just comment on it. One of the things we are doing at Zen Educate, and many of you know us, you know that we're a social enterprise, you know that we've made huge savings for schools because schools have been able to book staff through our online platform. And the catch-up curriculum, the catch-up premium can be used for small group tuition for students who've had to self-isolate or to cover staff absences. And we can also provide experienced staff so that your staff can contribute perhaps with groups that are where they're most needed. Got a quick slide here for you. We will be circulating the slides, but we are aware that we're really competitive in price, even without the subsidy. And you can increase your group sizes, providing more funding and more opportunities for your students. You will have access to qualified teachers if you work with us, and they are all vetted. There's lots of flexibility to have a programme that suits your needs. Because of the use of the online platform, you can rebook teachers you've worked with before. So we know we're reliable. We know we can support you with flexibility. If you do want to follow up on that, you can get in touch with us. You can get in touch with Lucy, whose smiley picture is just down there for you, and have a talk about how we could help. We didn't want to pass up on the opportunity as the question had been asked. I want to just finish off by saying a huge thank you to our panel for your time today and your candidness. What I'm aware of is just in the last few minutes, there is one question that we haven't really properly fully answered, and that is the question of mentor time. And I know it's a hard one because I know it has a cost implication, and I know it means that people are actually having time away from teaching if we're honest about the time. And I'm wondering whether anybody would honestly say how much time they think it takes to mentor an NQT. And I bear in mind, actually, there are probably the kind of benefits of scale are you can probably mentor 2 or 3 NQTs without needing to replicate the same amount of time you'd need for one, I'm guessing, because you could do small group work. But would anybody pitch in and say how much time they think it would take? It has been asked.
I would say if it's half a day a week, that would seem like a reasonable amount that you can afford.
Okay.
A reasonable amount that you can deliver. But what I would also add is that NQT support is about signposting as much as it is about working with, signposting to good training, signposting to good communities of practice, signposting to good NQT induction. And again, you could kind of give a weekly thing about on average, it's going to be half a day a week, but sometimes that's going to be 2 or 3 days in a week. Sometimes it's going to be nothing for a week or 2. So, you know, I would half a day. That would be my.
Okay. No, thanks, Mike. Victoria?
I would say similar, but something to think about practical for us is if the NQT is out, say, on a Thursday afternoon, and their mentor is in class on a Thursday afternoon, practically that will not work if obviously they need that support and that access, which is why as a school we wrap ourselves around our NQTs and our teachers, because there's no point having NQT time, especially at the minute when they can't go out visiting and things, if one of your NQT mentors are not out with you, supporting you, guiding you, talking through planning, talking through assessments, doing things together. Because even in COVID times, you can still, you know, sit in a room, social distance, working together on things. So I'd probably say half a day. But yeah, it's just thinking practically about making sure they have that time together.
Okay, so I'm hearing a really important message about flexibility. And I'm hearing, Mike, I think you're kind of alluding to the question of shared responsibility, actually, as well. And that this isn't a relationship about dependency.
No, this is about shared responsibility. And the other thing I would also want to say is that sometimes you need to leave people alone to let them think and reflect rather than constantly being in their ear, giving them advice. You know, you need actually to give some people the headspace to think about what they've done and reflect on it, and then ask questions that are specific to their need rather than someone with 700 years experience telling them how it was back in 1980 and what we used to do then. You actually go to you say, I'm struggling with this, so I need help with this. Can you help me with this? And sometimes actually you move their thinking on, but actually sometimes you've got to give them an opportunity to think about what they need rather than what you want to deliver. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. Because actually some of our learning comes in the struggle, doesn't it? You know, some of that, yeah. Sam, anything from you on that before I just wrap up for us?
Yeah, just agree with what the others have said. Also, I think you hinted at the economies of scale that you can get. I mean, I would, if you're in a big enough school or if you work in a group of schools, I would recommend having this kind of Uber mentor idea. As others have said quite often, you can combine being an NQT mentor with being a trainee mentor, which means that actually you might have a group of people. When I was on the Carter Review of Initial Teacher Training a few years ago, you know, some of the best school-based support came when schools had managed to organise the time so that at regular intervals, and I agree, it doesn't have to be every week necessarily, you'd get a group of your trainees and your NQTs together. And particularly with the early career framework, which matches onto the core content framework for initial teacher training, you can have a sort of seminar kind of experience. And it might not be that it needs a lot of input from the mentor. It might be just getting the group together to talk to each other about how they're getting on can be really helpful. But I think that just makes a bit of a more systematic approach and maximizes the use of time. And also, if you got that Uber mentor kind of role in there, it does give a sort of a career pathway progression for someone as well, you know, a sense of something that you could be aiming for in terms of taking on that role eventually.
Thank you, Sam. So colleagues, our panelists have shared about the good practice they lead, and you put huge amounts of effort and commitment into every step of way, from initial teacher training through to early career development. And we've had plenty of really good questions to reflect on. So thank you everybody for your time today. Thank you for our panel members. Thank you to Prestolee Skip for partnering with us on this webinar. The original idea came from a meeting with the Skip whilst we were looking at how we could better support NQTs. And we hope that this has been another step on that journey. I'd also like to thank the Zen Educate team who've worked really hard to put the webinar together. Lots of people that you can't see here today who've worked on tweets and polls and socials, and Anjali who's there who'll give us a wave, and Ross who's been working on the slides for us. We'd love to hear your NQT stories and also feedback from this event. And we'd also be really keen to hear what else you'd like to hear webinars on. We've already had people saying they'd like something on COVID catch-up curriculum. So we've got something planned early next term to think about that. So we hope we'll see you again then, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Thank you again to our panel. Thanks, colleagues. Bye-bye.